Hey everyone, this is Lance Garner. Thanks for joining the podcast today. We decided we're going to do something a little bit different this time. Dave and I have been thinking about what we could do to pull in some of the advice that we received over the last year, all of 2021. So what we did is we went through each podcast with each one of our guests, and we identified some of our favorite nuggets of advice that we thought we would share with you. There was just tons of great advice, recommendations, things like that for hunting and life in general, actually. But we identified 18 specific nuggets that we thought we'd share with you. And so that's what we're going to do today. Go through each one of those, talk about them, introduce them, and listen to our guests and what advice they have for us to make us better hunters. And we think you'll have an enjoyable time listening to this. So to kick things off, we are going to listen to Travis Ball. So Travis Ball's an elk hunter here in Utah. When we did the podcast, he had harvested a nice bull on the Utah Archery Limited Entry elk hunt. And one of the first things he talked to us about was patience and when bulls go silent. So let's take a listen. One of the things that stood out to me about your story is you had mentioned the bull went silent. And I think you got to show a lot of patience there, because a lot of times if they go silent, your reaction may be to get up, go look.
Right.
And if you would have done that, he sounds like he would have seen you.
Yeah. And honestly, I didn't know if, like I said, if I had spooked him or not. But what I noticed is that once he got down into that bottom, we were starting to talk again. I cow called him a few times. He bugled a couple more times in the bottom. But as he was going down that mountain off the hill,
Sure,
he wasn't bugling. He
Yeah.
wasn't responding back. But it didn't take him. Those elk move so fast. Even when they're not trying, they move so fast.
Yeah.
I bet it was maybe only 10 minutes that it took him to get off. But I thought I had lost him because he just went quiet while he was hiking down off the hill.
I think that's just something to always to remember. Just when they go quiet, there's a good chance they're moving. They're
Right.
coming towards you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I really like that. He didn't really come out and say, hey, here's some advice for the hunters, but it was just something we picked off, something to think about, that when you're out hunting and you hear a bull, you think he might be coming, and then he goes silent. And oftentimes we wonder, what happened? Did he walk away? Why did he go quiet? What's going on? But a lot of times they are just coming in quietly, silently. So you got to show patience and kind of play it out and see what happens. So that was kind of a piece of advice that we thought would be good to share with everyone, and just kind of jot that down and remember that one. I think that one could be helpful for all of us out in the field. All right, so our next one also came from Travis. He gave us some advice about just enjoying the experience and, avoiding undue pressure on ourselves, because a lot of us do that when we're hunting, and sometimes hunting isn't fun when we put too much pressure on ourselves. So let's take a listen. This is our final question.
All right, I'm ready
for the day. You ready?
Yeah.
So if you could offer one piece of advice to elk hunters, what would it be?
Don't get wrapped up in the score of the elk. Just have fun. Enjoy the experience. That's what it's all about.
Great.
I think that's a great response.
For
Like
me,
it.
that's how I look at it for myself. I find when I have a lot of pressure on myself, like, oh man, I can't come home empty-handed again. I got to come home with some meat. You look at the amount of money that we spend, all those things. Well, it's for a good reason. It's not just because we're trying to feed the family. Like, we got lots of ways of feeding the family.
Yeah.
Right.
So it really is, the reason why we're out there and doing that is the experience. So I would say enjoy it. You don't get that many days on the hills. You don't get that many days being out there. So enjoy it while you can. And
Couldn't agree more.
Yep.
good family and good friends and everything that you can do it with. It's makes life enjoyable. It's good.
That's great recommendation from Travis. Easier said than done, right? I mean, I think for all of us, when we go hunting, we want to be successful harvesting an animal. But we just got to remember, we're out there to have a good time, enjoyable time. Obviously, we want to be able to harvest something, bring home some meat, but we can't let that put us down if we don't get our animal. But just have fun and enjoy it. So I think that's good advice from him. All right, so our next piece of advice came from Damon Stone. So Damon Stone is a successful elk hunter. He shared his thoughts on hunting success during his podcast. And the thing he talked to us about was tools. So let's hear what he has to say about tools.
When it comes to elk hunting, is never go to the field with one one tool in your toolbox. So in that, I mean, you know, don't go out there thinking that you're going to blow a cow call and a bull's going to come running in, or you're going to bugle a bull in. I think that you have a list of tools in your repertoire of elk hunting tactics and techniques to get out there to make you more successful. I would say that over the 34 years that I've elk hunted, my most successful tactic is finding an area that I know elk move in and out of and just sit there and wait. That has paid off for me more times than it ever has calling in an elk. So I love to tree stand for elk. I love to still hunt for elk. Love to call elk, but I love to move, from one spot, call 3 or 4 times, sit there 15 minutes, move 45 yards, call 15 minutes, and move. I've been successful with that technique. So I think the one thing that a new or even a seasoned elk hunter can do or add any tactics or techniques or more to their repertoire of hunting skills,
that's a good
makes
idea.
You that way more successful.
Do what works,
Yeah, exactly.
What about, I guess assuming as well, just be willing to alter your plan,
Be
right?
adaptable.
Because I think a lot of people, they have one thing in mind, and we all do. We kind of vision what's going to happen. I'm going to sit here, and I'm going to cow call, and the bull's going to come walking in, and I'm going to shoot it, and usually don't work that way.
It doesn't work that way at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I seriously, I've been on more elk hunts for myself and other people where it's just happened. It hasn't been calling in one with bugle or with a bugle tube or calling in with a cow call or something like that. I mean, last year, the first night that I got up into camp, I walked up into a ridge that I've had success in, sat down and just sat there for an hour. And there was, a lot of fresh tracks coming through there. And I remember I thought, well, it's late. I better be getting out of here. And I got up and I started moving down through the lodge poles. And I got about 50 yards from where I was sitting. And I remember I heard a crack and I turned around and there was a bull standing 10 yards from where I was sitting. And I'm thinking, if I just waited 5 more minutes. And I went, dang those elk. Nemesis. Curse you. But I going back to what you said, Lance, your question, I believe being adaptable in elk hunting is the key to success for when it comes to elk hunting.
All right, some awesome advice there from Damon. I think we'll kind of hear that theme a little bit throughout this podcast too, about being adaptable. Definitely having different tools in your toolbox that you can use when you're out there hunting, because one thing may not work and another thing may. So you got to give some things, different things, different tries. So just a little advice there. All right, on to our next one. Our next guest was Nate Richards. He's the owner and operator of NR Peaks Outfitting Service. We asked him about his advice as from being an outfitter and a hunter, and it was short and sweet, but I think he really nailed it on the head on his piece of advice. From guiding and your own experience hunting, I mean, what's kind of one thing, or if you have multiple things, but one thing that kind of like a lessons learned you would share with the listeners from your years of hunting that you might want to share with them?
Well, I guess, if you want to be successful at something, you're going to have to earn it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too often we do want to, we want the quick and easy way rather than putting the hard work in, and especially hunting. Hunting is hard work, and as you mentioned earlier, just spending the time in the field trying to learn an area, because if you think you're going to go into an area the first time ever and just know it, it's not going to happen. You got to put the time in. Like you said, we really got to earn it. I think we all do this at some point where we, maybe we go to a new area. Maybe we're just hoping that someone will point us in the right direction and say, hey, here's where the elk are. But the reality is all of us have to put in the work, put in the time, and really have to earn it for ourselves. And I think it's more enjoyable that way too. I think when we put the work in, the success is just that much more enjoyable for us. So good advice from Nate. All right, on to our next guests. We interviewed Cody Jones and Rusty Robinson. So Cody is the big game coordinator for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, and Rusty is the manager of the Utah Central region. And we talked to them about a hunt that both of them went on that Cody actually had the tag. And we got into a lot of interesting discussions, particularly biology, other things like that. But we asked for their advice, and I've highlighted 3 specifically from those 2 gentlemen that let's go ahead and take a listen to.
As a hunter, you need to decide.
Do you want an experience, or
do you
want?
What do I want? What do I want out of this? Do I want to wait? You can do it. There are people this year that have 25 points and did not draw their elk tag.
Yeah.
That's unreal.
So do you want to wait or do you want to hunt? And we talked about before that there's the social aspect of hunting and the biological aspect of hunting, and they kind of mesh together. Our job is to make sure we don't do something biologically wrong. And socially, we try to manage how the public wants to see their animals managed.
Yeah.
You know.
And we try to do both. We try to have
absolutely
quality units, try to have opportunity units, and
All over the place.
everybody's got their own preference. There's some guys that are perfectly happy waiting 15 years and then have a giant, 370 bull in their house. And I'm the type, I'd rather have a garage full of raghorns with the chance at a big bull someday.
Yeah.
That's just
I'd rather have 10 300-inch bulls,
I'd rather have 10 200-inch bulls. I just like to hunt. I just like to hunt elk.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's okay to be either way. I'm not saying there's no right, there's no wrong.
Right.
But I'm with you. I mean, I'd rather have more opportunities to get out and hunt. If I can draw with 5 points on a limited entry unit, still going to be better than some of those over-the-counter units. And so,
100%.
Super sad about my cooling off period now.
You got a 5-year waiting
5
period.
years for you.
So hard.
It's the worst.
So now it's like, all right. So the thought is, where can I get in and get my deer done? And maybe if I get deer done quickly enough, I can go grab a pronghorn.
Let me give you some insight on how much of an opportunity hunter I am. I'm on waiting period for 3 different limited entry species. I just get whatever I can draw, and I move on.
Yeah.
Well, if you wait too long, I mean, like for me, I drew this year, so then we'll have the 5-year waiting period, and let's say it takes another just 5 points. Let's say that's 10 years away.
Yeah.
Suddenly I'm 55, and then the next time, who knows?
Yeah.
You're 70. Right. So I may only draw maybe one more time in my lifetime. Who knows?
Your hunting career.
You have a finite number of Septembers in your life.
That's true.
Take advantage of them.
Take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Get out.
Couldn't agree more. All right, that's the first piece of advice that we got from those 2 gentlemen. Let's jump over and listen to the second one. Something I'm curious about, especially from you guys have a unique perspective, is advice. What would you tell the general public, general hunters, maybe advice or lessons learned that you just want to share with people?
For elk hunting,
Yeah.
specifically?
Yep.
Be aggressive. Be aggressive. Be aggressive.
Go back to the cheer.
Kokomo.
So elk are way different than deer, and my experience is that if you're waiting to have one come to you, you're wasting opportunities to harvest elk.
Yeah.
The more aggressive hunter you are on elk, the more success you're going to have.
The first bull that I ever shot was that exact situation. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'd seen too many videos of calling and the bull coming in, and so that's kind of was my expectation. But this one night, this bull's bugling, and I just stayed there waiting for it, just waiting. It's got to, it's going to come in, and it never came. That night, I was just so mad at myself. I'm like, I've got to start being aggressive and stop this just waiting, thinking they're going to come to me. I've got to be aggressive with them. And the next day, I shot my first bull, and it was a mindset change. And it made a big difference. I couldn't agree more about being aggressive. You got to be smart, but you got to be aggressive.
Be smart, be aggressive.
And I'll say if you're hunting one bull and you really don't want to bugger him out of the canyon, then you maybe want to be a little more cautious. But the reality is during the rut, things are so fluid. They're so flexible. Those elk could be here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
And
the timing of the Utah archery hunt is specifically, like you're catching and you go from quiet bachelor groups of bulls to where'd they go? You know, do you know what I mean? You're catching right there. You could have out every trail camera in the world, and you're going to hit a point where consistent photos, good bulls, and then they're gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it just
they change.
We see it every year.
Yep.
We see that every year. Exactly what you just explained.
And you could see it the other way too. And I found it this way where I've got a canyon full of nursery groups, cows and calves, and I just keep checking on it every couple of days. I go check on it, and then one day you'll show up and they're just not there anymore. And you go, okay, a bull probably came in and pushed them in the next canyon. You walk over the next canyon, and there they are with a big bull. And so you can
ground them up, push them out.
Yeah.
All right, be aggressive, right? I think we hear that a lot about being aggressive, being smart at the same time. There are times when you got to be less aggressive, but I've heard that quite a bit from multiple hunters, and I think we might even hear that again here in this podcast. But anyways, something to consider. So last item, this one's from Rusty Robinson. So what about you, Rusty? Any thoughts on something you'd share?
My advice would be just be adaptable. And some guys, calling is their thing. They want to call in a bull, and that's great. If that's how they want to do it, then do it that way. But the reality is, like you said, sometimes you call them in, sometimes you spot and stock, sometimes you sit water. Some guys like to, just hike miles and miles and miles in dark timber and call. I'm more visual. I like this. Even if I'm calling, I like to see them come in. I want to have eyes on them the whole time, things like that. So I would just say, learn as many tactics as you possibly can and figure out when the best time to employ them is, and you'll be more successful.
All right, there you go. There's another one about being adaptable. Back to kind of what Damon Stone had mentioned about having multiple tools in your toolbox. All right, so our next guest is Kyle Douglas. If you don't know, Kyle Douglas is a really successful pro champion archer. So he is a 2-time Vegas Open pro champion, and he's also an avid elk hunter. And so we sat down with Kyle and we talked about a myriad of things, but I highlighted several items from Kyle, but I'm giving you 3 specifically today that I think is good advice from him. And so let's go ahead and listen to the first one.
Way back when I used to kind of just set up my hunting bow, take a day or two and set it up, because I shoot tournaments all the time. And I'm like, oh, it's good enough for hunting bow. I can hit a paper plate at 60 every shot, no problem. That's easy to do. But now I've switched over and I fine-tune my hunting bow to the max. That thing is absolutely dialed, just like it would be to take it to a tournament, because I know if I'm going to get one shot, it's going to be the very best shot I could possibly make. So
that's smart.
I put big stabilizers on there with weight on them, and I pack a heavy bow that's got bigger stabilizers just because I want the very best shooting bow that I could possibly have, regardless of what it takes to pack it around.
All right, so Kyle talks to us about the importance of really fine-tuning your hunting bow. Obviously, people that are competing in these tournaments, they put a lot of effort into fine-tuning their bows, but it's something that Kyle is really stressing that, you're probably only going to get one opportunity to actually let an arrow fly, and you want to make sure that your bow's tuned as well as possible, and so you got to really take advantage of that opportunity and capitalize on it. So, all right, let's listen to Kyle's next piece of advice.
I spend a ton of time working on my bow. And I do a lot of stabilization with my draw length. So I'll play with my draw length just in minute amounts, and that totally changes the way my pin settles on the target.
Really?
Yep. So I bet you I spend as much time working on draw length and loop length and peep height as I do on tuning my bow.
Really?
Serious.
Yeah. To me, that's way more critical than a well-tuned bow is how the bow fits me and the peep height and draw length and all that kind of stuff.
So probably the average hunter or most hunters probably don't even think about that, do they? I mean, because we buy a bow and it's X draw length, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we go with. We don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, they'll come in and, like in the shop, there's a lot of people that don't know what their draw length is. So they'll come in, we'll measure them, and we'll get them close. And then I'll stick them in a bow and kind of fine tune them on the bow the best that I can. You can't tell on somebody if they're a 1/16 of an inch too long or too short. They have to do that on their own in shooting, and you've got to be a good enough shooter to be able to realize those things. But to me, a 1/16 of an inch in draw length is a really big deal.
Huh. Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I wouldn't have even thought that.
All right, maybe I'm going to have to buy a bow now. Have Kyle set it up.
Especially on target bows. Like, I would much rather go to a tournament with a bow that's shooting 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch tear out of the bow that fits me perfectly and holds really well than a bow that's tuned absolutely perfect and my draw length is like an 1/8 of inch off or something like that. I would shoot like garbage.
There you have it from somebody who knows, being a 2-time champion, on the importance of making sure that your bow fits. I know I haven't really put that much of attention into my draw length. Obviously I try to get it close, but it's kind of whatever the shop tells me it is, and then I run with it. I don't sit and practice and try to get an idea of, hey, am I off by 1/8 of an inch or whatnot? And maybe I need to spend more time in the bow shop, going out shooting, coming back to the bow shop, and making those fine-tuned adjustments. Anyways, pretty good advice from Kyle. All right, let's get the last piece of advice from Kyle. He talks to us once again about being aggressive.
I would say mostly knowing when to be aggressive and when to kind of hold back a little bit. For me, that's kind of been the turning point from when I just went up hunting and worked my butt off and never shot anything to where I started killing stuff a little bit more consistently. It's just kind of figuring that out and knowing when to hurry and when to go slow and be quiet. And
were you more aggressive before when you're maybe not as successful?
I was not as aggressive.
As aggressive.
Yeah, not even close. I'd kind of try and call a little bit, and if they weren't responding to the call, I was like, oh, don't scare them away. And, stuff like that, and try not to bugger them. And nowadays it's like I like the first 2 weeks of September the best, or my favorite for the most part, because if I get one to bugle back at me, I just charge right at them as fast as I can possibly go, breaking branches, just running until I get within maybe 150 yards or so, and then slow down a little bit and kind of play it a little bit more carefully. Where before I'd be like, 200 or 300 yards away, and I'm like trying to slowly tiptoe in there real quiet so they don't know I'm there. And it didn't work. I didn't get there fast enough. By the time I got there, they moved and gone, and now I just start running at them.
What do you think made you not be aggressive initially?
I think just worried I was going to screw it up.
Yeah.
And now
Chase
it's
them
like,
off, yeah.
you screw some up when you're too aggressive, and you screw some up when you're not aggressive enough. And if you screw it up, you just go keep walking and find another one.
All right, another one about being aggressive and knowing when to be aggressive and when to hold back. Good advice. All right, so our next podcast, we talked to Leah Leggett and Mia Anstein, and we talked to Leah because she had this incredible hunting story of harvesting her first bull elk, and she harvested it with a bow. And her mom, Mia, joins us, and Mia is also, she's an accomplished hunter, and she guides, she does a lot of things. And this podcast, if you missed it, I recommend really going back and listening to it. It's really motivational. Leah shares her story of how she fell off of a horse, injured her back severely, but she wasn't going to let that stop her from going out and bow hunting and being successful. So here's the advice from both Leah and Mia. The first one here, there's actually 3. The first one, Mia talks about teaching your child how to hunt. Mia, I'm curious, what made you get Leah out hunting at such a young age? Because I think, as Leah had mentioned, 2 years old, you were taking her out there hunting. By 6 years old, she's, hunting turkeys. I mean, what made you kind of want to get her involved into hunting?
I always included Leah in everything I did. And it was kind of like friends would invite me over for parties and stuff like that. And if they said no kids were allowed, then I would just skip it. And so just taking her along out on a hunting trip was no different. That's the best way to teach a kid to behave in the outdoors, or even you take a kid to a restaurant. That's how they learn to behave at a restaurant. You always know which kids haven't been,
or been
out and out by the way they behave.
The ones jumping on the table.
Yeah. So I always just took her along, and maybe sometimes she would spoil a hunt, but also it was always a learning opportunity, and for me and for her. So that was my goal, was to teach her. And we had a ton of fun, picking up rocks or leaves or looking at scat and tracks and stuff like that. And she probably knew more about that than a lot of adults by the time she was 6 years old when she took hunter education. So I actually teach hunter ed now, and it's amazing how you can see which youngsters have been included and which ones haven't. Like some of them come from hunting families and they might be 9 or 10 years old, but they don't know anything. And so their families might hunt, but they haven't been included. So it's a lot more difficult for them to understand things. So we might think things are common sense because we've been around it a lot. Whereas if you don't take kids out, they just don't know it's not common sense. So.
Yeah. Well, you had mentioned in that story, I had highlighted a quote, I guess a quote or comment you had made. You said, "I've included Leah whenever critical thinking and decision making are needed." And I think what's funny is I think a lot of parents are the opposite. You know, when there's those critical thinking, maybe those more serious moments or whatever, we have a tendency to leave our kids out of it. And it sounds like you've done a great job of including Leah in those kinds of activities, and that's smart, right? It's hard, but it's really smart to do.
Yeah, and especially I think for some people during hunting season, you know, if it's my hunt and if it's a 5-day season or a 9-day season, I can take her and ask her, like, do you want to go this way or that way? Or what do you think we should do? And maybe I will end up filling my tag or maybe not. But always it's just the learning opportunity and the experience for her is more important than whether you notch your tag or not.
Nice. Well, that's great to hear. I just love that quote from Mia about including how she included Leah in critical decision making, because I think that's just such a great way to teach your child about how to hunt. Sure, they may not make the right decision every time, but that's how you kind of guide them and help them understand maybe there's a better decision or a better idea. But including them in those critical decisions and critical thinking, I think is just an awesome piece of advice from Mia. All right, so our next piece of advice from Mia, she talks about using a decoy. So let's hear what she has to say. Mia, you used a decoy. Have you, as a guide, do you use decoys very often?
You know, we always talk about this side of the hill and that side of the hill, and this side of the hill, and talking about the mountains and the Continental Divide. This side, the decoys don't really work. In 2018, I drew a limited draw tag in another unit on the other side of the hill. And there were so many elk there because it's limited that we ended up learning. It was just my husband and I, and we hunted, I think 18 days up there, but we learned that the decoys worked up there. And so with Leah, it was like, what can we do to help her? And we were like, we may as well try the decoy, you know, because she would go some days with my husband and some days she'd just come with me. And we were like, what can we do to help? And the decoy, as they're supposed to, it's a distraction. And with her hunt, it definitely worked. Yeah. And we just used the Rocky Mountain elk, the cow decoy, and it definitely was a good distraction.
Yeah. Was it like the full side body one or just from the one from behind?
It was the full side body one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Those are
and
nice.
When we were hunting in the other unit, like I said, we used the rump and we used the full body. And on that, with just having two of us, I mean, when you have a caller, and that's where, like, if your decoy is stationary and you're just calling from the decoy, you're not moving around. And so it's nice to have another caller that can move around. But also, if you can move the decoy, you know, they're not as fixated on it. Whereas if your decoy is just standing still being a fake thing, they eventually figure out that it's fake. So
makes sense.
There's a whole technique to using them.
All right. We got one more from Mia that we want to share with you. This one really resonates with me, as you'll kind of hear in this recording in this podcast with Mia. Here we go. Well, I definitely can say you really committed yourself. You went all in. Mia, you'd mentioned in the article about the importance of being all in. I actually, 2 years ago, I had a Benchmade knife that I bought and had written on it, be all in, because I think it's so important. I found myself a lot of times when I was hunting that I was 75% there. I really wasn't dedicating myself and putting myself really in the moment and doing whatever I needed to. And as you'd mentioned in there, that being all in really helps create those opportunities, and I think is so important to being successful. And obviously, Leah was definitely all in on this one.
And being all in, you can a lot of people, oh, well, I work, I do this. You can be all in, as she has just said with her school, like in between, like focus that time, that your free time to the hunts. And a lot of people, when we were guiding, they'll come for their hunting season. Oh, well, I'm going to leave 2 days early because I want to go watch a football game, or, I have this season, but I'm tired, so I'm just going to leave. And it's like, well, you're tired, go take a nap, go take a break, but then come back and hunt. Or before the hunt, train and get fit and get in shape to go.
Yeah.
Which, even her with her injured back and, her muscles can be weakened too when she gets tired just from those nerves, but she's still, you have to find that balance while you're all in.
Yeah, like I said on that one, it really resonated with me. I had a knife, I bought a knife from Benchmade, and I had written on it, "Be All In." And the reason I did that, as I'd mentioned in that podcast, was I just kind of needed that reminder to be all in at all times. I think we've all heard, anything worth doing is worth doing right. And sometimes, you just maybe don't put all the effort in that you need to, but if you're going to do it, you might as well put in the effort and do the best you can. And so just a little reminder for myself that I had to do. And so I really like that comment from Mia. All right, on to our next guest. So our next guest is Dirk Durham. As many of you know him as the Bugler. He works for Phelps Game Calls. He's an accomplished elk hunter in other areas, accomplished elk bugling champion. And so I sat down with Dirk, and this was a great podcast, and he shared a few things with us that I thought we ought to pass on to everyone in case you didn't get to hear it in the original podcast. So let's hear what he has to say about the first item, and it kind of goes back to tools. I personally use the white Phelps amp call. That's the one that I use probably 90% of the time. I keep the pink Phelps and the red Maverick Phelps with me as well, just in case I want to do something a little different and scream. But I think it's nice to have, I guess I'll call it a little bit of an arsenal or different tools, because I've been out calling before and using the white one, and nothing would respond. And literally, out of my own frustration, knowing there's got to be something nearby, I just pulled out the red one, and I just gave it the most frustrated scream I've ever given it. and a bull rips one off right, probably 200 yards away. And so I think it's nice. They sounds like to me they kind of respond differently to different sounds. Maybe they recognize something, but this bull, he was refusing to respond until I gave him that rip, and he fired right off. So it's kind of nice to have that arsenal, those tools.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Nobody, maybe somebody does, but nobody goes fishing with only one lure in their tackle box, right? Most guys that fish, they got too many different kind of lure. They got all of them. Told their wife they paid a lot less for them than they really did too, but kind of like guns. But you want lots of variety, and sometimes different folks are not, with their calling abilities, maybe they just can't get all those different tones with one reed, so it takes 2 or 3 different diaphragms to get those desired tones and sounds, and which is cool because at least they've got that option to get out there, mix it up, find out what they're biting on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that because, when I was a kid, I'd go fishing with my grandpa. We'd go troll fishing, and he made sure that we all had the same triple teaser, but one guy was using blue, one was using orange, one was using gold, one was using yellow, and we found out what they were biting on, and then we'd all switch, right? We'd all switch to that color, and it works. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea. All right, there's another one about different tools. All right, on this next one, if you remember, Dirk had actually injured his shoulder about 1.5 years ago, and because of that, he had to use a mouth tab to be able to draw back his bow. And so we were talking about that, and he shares his thoughts on practicing.
If I'd have fumbled, the arrow, like getting it knocked, if I'd have fumbled that, I might have not. It'd have been a different story maybe, but I practiced that a lot, that same, like, pull it out of the quiver, knock it, that whole process over and over. And I think watching a lot of newer archers that haven't spent a lot of time, just maybe they're shooting in their backyard, pulling their arrows out of the, maybe out of a holder or something, or out of their hip quiver. But by practicing, like pulling it out of your quiver every single time, do the same exact movements over and over and over again, it becomes commonplace. That way during crunch time, you don't fumble, you don't drop the ball, which if you're not used to that, if you're just shooting out of a hip quiver in your backyard, there's that opportunity of that you may fumble and you just may not get that shot you wanted. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's a good idea. I hadn't really thought about that. Some of those other things you got to do that just to kind of repeat to make sure you don't mess it up, because anything can happen when in that heat of that moment, stuff happens.
Well, elk hunting is such a comedy of errors. I mean, there's so many little things that have to click exactly perfect. Like, I don't know, like back in the old days before D-loops, I called in a couple giant bulls for my brother, and everything was right. Bull comes in, he's knocked up, got his release on his string, pulls back, arrow falls off. Well, he had his release kind of tipped up and applying pressure on the back of the knock, and it kind of pushed it forward and almost off the string to where when he pulled it back, it just fell off the string. Those little errors, I mean, you got to work it out. You got to figure those out. You got to stay cognitive, and you got to stay you got to stay present in your shot process. Because if you just kind of black out, anything can happen.
That's so true. Just anything can really happen. I've had so many, like he called it, comedy of errors that happen out in the field. And I think by practicing just the little things, just exactly the way you would do it in the field, in the backyard, at the archery range, doing it the same way over and over and over again, you'll perform better, and hopefully you'll avoid some of those mistakes because it's like he said, you almost kind of like black out. It just all happens so fast, and so you need to have kind of that muscle memory. All right, this next item, I had asked Dirk about his advice, and I guess knowing that it was the bugler, I thought he would share some advice on bugling or calling, but I was pleasantly surprised about what he shared with us. So here we go.
I've kind of always had this idea in my head, but I think I've learned that a lot of people don't always see it this way, as much as the kind of ethics or standards you hold yourself to is not necessarily what everyone else holds themselves to. And that can kind of be frustrating sometimes because, when you meet people in the woods, there's some people that are like, hey, it's national forest. I can go anywhere you want. That's true. But I always kind of like to, if I see somebody in the woods and even if I'm close enough to talk to them, say, hey, how's it going? Which way are you going? I'll go the other way or whatever. Not always, people don't always do that, but I feel like one thing, we're all in this together, and there's so much division out there. Whether you're bow hunting, rifle hunting, muzzleloader hunting, spear hunting, whatever it is, everybody needs to put their swords down.
Yeah.
And just get along. And when you see each other, be good to each other, be kind to each other, help each other out. Because if we don't, this is all going to disappear. And they're trying real hard right now, and they'll get their way. Divided we fall, united we stand. So guys, just be good to each other out there. And I've always kind of had that idea, like, be good to other people anyway. But you see it more now than ever. I don't know if because it's new people that didn't have anybody to mentor them. They're getting new to hunting, and maybe they just didn't have anybody to mentor them. Is it cool to sit in somebody else's tree stand? Is it cool to barge right by the guy on the trail with your ATV? When he's sitting there, trying to he hiked in somewhere. I mean, be good to each other. I mean, it's simple. If I get to a trailhead where there's not a lot of country behind where the vehicle's parked, I'll go somewhere else. I don't want to go in there. I don't want to have to compete with another hunter. I don't want to mess it up for him. I don't want him messing up for me, but I don't know if a lot of people understand that or think about that.
All right. I love it. Really good comment from Dirk. Respect one another out there. Let's stick together, unite as hunters. Great comment. All right. So if you're keeping track here, we are now on number 17 of 18. So this next piece of advice came from Casey Wall. Casey harvested a giant bull on the coveted Utah Boulder Plateau unit. And he just shares his thoughts on advice about being persistent and working hard. So what kind of lessons learned did you get from this hunt?
I'd say persistence. I mean, obviously I was going in there wanting to spend a lot of time and effort on this hunt because it was such a special hunt.
Yeah.
But going and just taking the time and a lot of hikes, setting up the cameras, doing your due diligence, and just working hard.
There you go. Working hard, be persistent. You tell non-hunters that hunting is hard work, and they'd probably just laugh and say, whatever. But it really is. It's hard work. It's hard physically. It's hard on you mentally and emotionally. And that's where the persistence comes in. You just got to keep grinding if you want to be successful. So anyways, great comment from Casey Wall. All right, last one. This one comes from Brooke Chappell. He wasted no time harvesting a bull with his rifle during a limited entry elk hunt in Utah. And basically he gives his thoughts on what he would have done different.
We talked about this like after we got back from the taxidermy, and stuff. We were sitting around there in the cabin and kind of talking about, our experiences, elk hunting and stuff. And of the bulls that are in our cabin, most of them we never had actually seen before, like before the hunt, And so we were going back over some of the pictures of bulls we had on camera, and this was not a bull we had on camera the entire summer.
Wow.
So we had, 40 cameras out all summer, and this bull was not on any of them.
That's amazing.
And so one of the things we talked about is it's nice to put out cameras, and I think cameras work a lot better, especially if you're putting them on water for the archery hunt. I think that intel goes a long ways because that really helped my brothers in their hunts. But I think with the rut, they move so much that if I had to do it again, I'd probably take 2 or 3 days off before the hunt, like right before, they're starting to rut, and then I would spend more time then scouting than focusing on putting out cameras.
There you go. Spending some time just before the hunt, maybe getting there a few days early before the hunt starts, getting boots on the ground, seeing what's happening, because things do change when you put up cameras in the summer. From the time the rut kicks in, the elk act differently, and so all bets are off a lot of times. So anyways, there you go. So there's 18 nuggets of advice that we wanted to share from our 2021 podcast episodes. This was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to go back through all the podcasts and listen to the advice. Trust me, this was just a snippet of all the advice we received over the year, and really look forward to doing the same kind of a podcast next year for 2022 and sharing and compiling the advice from our guests. Dave and I doing this podcast, we have never intended to try to be the experts, if you will. Our whole point of this is really to bring in other hunters and listen to their advice, listen to their stories, so we can all learn from them and hear from them. And hopefully that's what you heard today, is getting some good advice from other hunters. And man, we'd love to hear from any of you. If any of you want to be on the podcast, reach out to us, send us a direct message on Instagram, and let us know what you think. We'd love to have you on. And anyways, this was a lot of fun to do this podcast, and look forward to 2022 and sharing more stories with you and talking to some different folks out in the industry. And also, if you're interested, we're now out on YouTube. So if you want to listen to us on YouTube, if it's any easier that way, you can do that. Also, we're now on Facebook. We've got the podcast on Facebook. So Instagram, we have our snippets, but then we also have our podcast, obviously, on all the major podcast sites. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to talking with you next time. All right, see ya. Bye.